We're in Romans and the 10th chapter. And something that is said here, verse 9, that if thou confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. You know, there's a qualification that you believe that God has raised him from the dead. Almost as though that is the answer for everything, the satisfaction for everything. And this is why I constantly stay in a state of perpetual confusion about people who will not examine the evidence. As I've said to you before, this is a ministry that has more than chewed around the evidence of the resurrection. And if you haven't examined that evidence, please don't go, yes, I think, or I'm not sure. There are scholarly works that I've probably mentioned every single year, but there are scholarly works that basically were done by people who set out to disprove the resurrection. They set out to disprove the Bible and came away with some of the greatest proofs and some of the greatest faith for people who started out as wanting to show that this is nothing but a mythological fraud pulled off on people who are just weak and stupid. So if you're interested, as I said, there's a lot of scholarly works. The work of Simon Greenleaf is one of them. There are just plenty of books that, as I said, are scholarly, that line up the evidence. So if you haven't looked at that, please, and whether it's through this ministry and the messages that are presented through this ministry on the resurrection, or if you, as I said, go to these scholarly works, it should be enough to make the lights come on to where you suddenly go, okay, I'm going to order my life around the fact that he rose from the dead. And even with Paul's, that verse 9 I just read, if you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus, believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. So there we begin to see almost subtle, we'll call it subtle doctrine being nestled in here. What I do want to point out, and most of us have been exposed to this, I just want to show you how easy it is to take Scripture and take license. So we're clear that these chapters are Paul. He starts off, the 9th, 10th, and 11th chapters are kind of the same thing. Great heaviness and continual sorrow in my heart, for I wish that myself were accursed from Christ, from my brethren, my kinsmen, according to the flesh. He says that there, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to God for Israel is that they might be saved. And then again, he says in chapter 11, hath God cast away his people? God forbid. So when you read what is contained in chapters 9, 10, and 11, be very careful, because evangelists do this. They take this, they lift it out, and they approach it, and they want to stick it on everybody. And that can be done as a secondary approach, but you must understand the first reason why he penned this like this. So let me start at verse 5. Let me read a little bit for the benefit of the folks who may not have their Bibles open. So we ended with, Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believeth. For Moses describeth the righteousness which is of the law, that the man which doeth those things shall live by them. It's kind of interesting. All of these small little words that are nestled in here, like Moses describeth. It doesn't say Moses says. Moses describeth that the righteousness which is of the law, that the man which doeth those things shall live by them. But the righteousness which is of faith speaketh on this wise, saying not in thine heart, who shall ascend into heaven, that is to bring Christ down from above, or who shall descend into the deep, that is to bring up Christ again from the dead. But what saith it? The word is nigh thee, even in thy mouth and in thy heart. That is the word of faith which we preach, that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. Now imagine, try and take away, if you ever looked at this as the evangelist text, and try and look at this as he's talking to people who engaged heavily in lip service to God, right? That's why he says if you believe in your heart and your confession is made with a little bit more than what the problem that my brethren we were dealing with before, which is The platitudes lobbed God's way, but the heart is not there. That is the essence of what is being said there, but there's more to this. If you go back, it's kind of interesting. There are two quotes being quoted here. They're not verbatim quotes. One of them is, "You shall therefore keep my statutes and my judgments, which if a man do, he shall live in them. I am the Lord." That's one. And the other one, that was in Leviticus 18:5. And the other one that is said in Deuteronomy 30, it says, "For this commandment which I command thee this day, it is not hidden from thee, neither is it afar off. It is not in heaven that thou shouldest say, shall we go up for us to heaven and bring it down to us that we may hear it and do it? Neither is it beyond the sea that thou shouldest say, who shall go over the sea for us and bring it to us that we may hear it and do it? But the word is very nigh unto thee, in thy mouth and in thy heart, that thou mayest do it." So you can see Paul is quoting from Moses, and it's very, very interesting because any person steeped in the Torah, the first 5 books, would know that this is something Moses is telling the children of Israel about the fact that God is accessible, that you are able, that God essentially chose you, and if you choose to walk in God's way, essentially the quote is, "If a man do it, he shall live." But the reality is, and we know from studying the Scripture, that no man could, not even the best man could, keep the law. So it becomes important to look at those Scriptures where Christ says, "I did not come to destroy the law, but I came to fulfill it." And then we start looking at everything that Christ says to see, is this so? Which we know it is. So it's kind of interesting that right here in the 10th chapter, we're looking at a couple of dynamics here. One, it's as though Paul is juxtaposing what his brethren, his kinsmen, may have understood as salvation their way, all right? Righteousness to do the works thereof, versus what is by faith. Salvation essentially by faith. So if those two concepts are nestled in there, and they are throughout 9, 10, and 11, he's juxtaposing these things, it's important to understand that when Christ declared, "It is finished," it wasn't just, "It is finished, the work I came to do, my earthly ministry, dying on the cross," but "it is finished" also brought to completion something, and that is the fulfillment, barring the resurrection, the fulfillment of the law in Christ. Now, think about this. The Ark of the Covenant contained 3 items, all right? Those 3 items, if you remember, the pot of manna that they collected, the bread from heaven, Aaron's rod that budded overnight as a type of the resurrection, and the unbroken tables of stone. All of this in the ark, which we looked at, which typifies Christ. So when people say, "How so? How can you say he fulfilled it?" The pictures and the shadows and types were there all along if you were looking. But again, I've described more than once adequately that many of these people could not see, nor could they hear. This is what is said in Isaiah, I believe it is Isaiah 6. And somewhat interesting because, again, if you were reading Isaiah 6, would you think that God was speaking to you, to your brethren, or to somebody else, right? Here, when Isaiah says, "Send me," right? And God says to him, "Okay, go tell this people, hear ye indeed, but understand not. And see ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of this people fat, make their ears heavy, shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and convert and be healed." That is God through the prophet saying, "I'm going to blind them. They're not going to be able to see." So it's almost a miracle that you have the few that could receive and hear in Christ's day. If you think about it, it was foretold by the prophet. Many things were foretold by the prophet. We tend to read them with a little bit of a skewed understanding. So let me keep reading because there's some other things that I'd like to point out. When he says, who shall descend to the deep, or who should ascend to the heavens? In other words, as I said, he's quoting Moses out of Deuteronomy 30, but I want to make something clear. He's saying there is no work to this. You don't go and seek out. Now, there are people, trust me, when I used to go into the prisons and the jails, and people would use verbiage that they just did not understand what they were saying. Instead of saying, the Lord found me, where I was, how I was, took me how I was, where I was, they'll say things like, I was looking for the Lord. No, my friend, you were not looking for the Lord. Because the initiative doesn't start with you, and it can never start with you. It has to start with God. God places that spiritual desire in our heart. You're not born with it. Sorry. You're not born to desire God. If we were born in unfallen Adam, you would be born to desire God, but you're not born to desire God. You're born, like I'm born, with a dark heart and a dark mind, and that can only be touched, illuminated by God at His prerogative, at His initiative. This is the word we call prevenient grace. So it's pretty ludicrous that the argument that Paul's making here is to say you don't have to work at who should ascend or who should go down. There is no work. He is here. And the reason why he says, and the word is nigh, it's in you, is he's referring to that which God spoke to us specifically regarding the Holy Spirit. Through Paul, he explains it as a part deposit, the Greek word erabon. That is the mechanism, if you will, that stops the work, that stops the flesh action that says, God reached down into this crock of clay in the stream of time to place the part deposit of His eternal nature in me. Now, doesn't mean that automatically my eyes are open and I see everything crystal clear like God. But I begin to desire, I begin to have questions, I begin this journey we call Christianity. So the reason for him saying the word is nigh, it's in your mouth, in your heart, the word of faith which we preach, and that word of faith, there are two Greek words. I taught on this many, many years ago. One word for the Greek word is logos, which is also connotes Christ, the Word, and this word, which is Strong's 4487, which is rhema, the rhema of God. And I showed you back when I taught this lesson, they are two distinct concepts. One is completely representing the Word, which became flesh, that's Christ, and then the Word itself, the written Word, which becomes the spoken Word. But the rhemas of God, the best way for me to describe this would be when Christ was being tempted by the devil, and Christ used a rhema. So it's something that is, we quote Scripture, right? When he says, for example, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. That's a rhema. I just quoted Scripture. These are the words of Christ or the words of God. Those are rhemas. We have plenty of them that should be fresh in your mind. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. You could, anything that is in your mind that's part of Scripture would be a rhema versus logos. So when he says the word of faith, and it's very important that we kind of stop there, not go too fast. You may say, I'm slowing down a bit today. Yep, I want to make sure this is understood. The sayings of faith which we preach. And if you were to comb Romans 9, 10, and 11, there are plenty of rhemas embedded in the logos. Does that make sense? Gosh, I hope I didn't confuse you. But plenty of sayings of God when he says, Moses describeth, for Isaiah says, for Hosea said. These, essentially, it's not exact, but that's the easiest way for me to explain what a rhema is. So if I stood here and I just started quoting Scripture, the Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want, I've just basically, that is a rhema. It's something I've spoken, but it's in my mind, comes out of my mouth, But it's part of the Word of God. It may not be perfect also. I may not be saying it perfectly, but that's what he's saying. And this rhema of faith which we preach. This is the problem with a lot of churches today. And I'm not meaning to bag on other churches or rip people apart, but this is the problem. The rhemas of faith which we preach. So I got to ask the question, if people are not being taught, we'll say it like this, denned in, something is repeated, and it's repeated, and it's repeated, and it's repeated until you say, yep, I know, blessed men go through valleys of weeping, fret not. You can repeat them all, right? A good teacher is going to walk you through multiple times in different ways. So now I've approached the subject by 20 different ways. I've been repeating myself until the subject matter begins to crystallize. That takes, on my part, that takes patience. You know how much I just want to get in the pulpit and I want to put the pedal down and I want to go, okay? But I can't. Now, I'm notorious. I've told you I do dumps of information. That's not lazy. That's designed to make you go, what the hell just happened here? Now you've got to start sorting stuff out, and you might actually take hold of one thing I said, and that one thing is what's going to stick. There are methods to teaching people. But if the process of teaching does not have the word of faith in it, we're talking now about the church, about conforming men and women to the image and likeness of Christ. If the rhemas of faith are not there, you are going to have arrested development, stunted spiritual growth. Why? Because the premise of everything is with God, all things are possible. I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. God's word shall not return void. I can keep going. The idea is to grab hold and to say, okay, Paul's very specific here. He says everything that he's been preaching, it's inside you now. Open your mouth, speak it forth. That is not the evangelist talking to pee-wee Christian saying, yes, now I'm a sinner, and I know I'm a sinner, and I need to be saved, and I've repeated the prayer of salvation, so that means that I'm saved, period. Okay, goodbye. The word of faith. Now, he will elaborate again, because he says, for with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. If you remember, I taught on many of these words, confession, the word homologia in the Greek, where behavior and belief meet. So you have people within the church that don't understand what this word confess means. So they think, I got to stand here and I speak as loud as I can to confess whatever they think that is. It's not that. Think of it as where the rubber meets the road, where everything that has been infused inside of me now has the opportunity to come out. And I'm using simple terms. I'm not even going to do translation right now. I want this to be crystallized before I move anywhere else. That someone's, and I hate the word belief as you do because it's very weakened and it doesn't convey what I want to say, but to be simple. Behavior and belief, the junction, is not so that brother or sister so-and-so can say, oh, I see you. You become a Christian now. You behave properly. We're not talking about that. There are things that I'm sure Paul could even see when he addressed certain problems in the churches, where he might say this behavior and belief at a crossroads has gone off the rails. Something is gone wrong. So the important thing that is being denned in here, and he's repeating it and repeating it. For with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For the scripture saith, whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed, for there is no difference between the Jew and the Greek. For the same Lord over all is rich unto all that call upon him. Let me take some liberty for a second, because I've been dying to do this. There is no difference between the Jew and the Greek. There is no difference between the person that likes pink hair and whatever they identify as. There is no difference. I'm sorry, those are your personal issues. We're talking about your standing in Christ. God is no respecter of persons. If you think you need a special church because you're special to come into the church because you're special, you have not understood the gospel, and you should be out on the street until you understand that that behavior is a blasphemy against Christ and against the very thing when he said, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against. I will build my church. Building the church requires people coming in the door recognizing, I'm a sinner, I'm messed up, I'm not okay, I'm fallen. It's like walking around wearing completely filthy, dirty clothes. Ever seen the people on the street? They're covered in filth. Covered. Now imagine that covering is not dirt from the streets, but imagine that that's sin. And you wear it. And you wear it every day. That's your clothing every day. And then suddenly you come into the church. Faith, the word of faith, which we preach, has taken hold, and suddenly the garments, onlooking audience says, you're still filthy. And I look at them in the mirror and I say, they're perfectly clean. I don't need to put on the colors of the world to come into the church. That's like saying, I'm going to tell God what to do. There is neither Jew nor Greek. He says it somewhere else when he says there's neither male nor female. Please keep your sexism and your racism and all of your scabbala, whatever it is, out of the church of Jesus Christ. He said he came to seek and to save the lost. And last time I checked, the lost don't get to identify how lost they are. Simply, I am lost. I need to be found. God help me. What happened to that? This is why I have a challenge. Some of you are going to be like, oh boy. But it's not for any of you. Maybe it is. Maybe you know someone who doesn't come into the church because they're going to judge me. I live an alternative life. That's all excuses, by the way. Would you want me to say that again? I don't come into the church because, the people in the church will condemn me. That is your problem. Because if the church is doing its part and teaching people properly, then the teaching says this. Pastor Scott is a sinner. She sins daily. She is being saved by God's grace. All the congregation of Faith Center, you're all sinners being saved by God's grace, washed by the blood of Jesus Christ. How do we separate the sinners from the special sinners? Now we'll make a special area just for the special sinners. Now I have a challenge. My challenge is to you out there in TV land. For you who make excuses and say, I couldn't go to church because, they're going to judge me. That's your problem. Have I ever in this church, I can't speak for any other church, have I ever said, you can't come in here, so-and-so is a pothead drug addict who, is a fish tank of alcohol, can't come in here because they drink and they smoke. Sorry, but Jesus sat down with people that the Pharisees and the scribes wouldn't sit with, and this man sits with sinners. Oh my God, that is the church of Jesus Christ. So when we get over ourselves and how special our sins are, my challenge is try. I can't speak for any other church. I don't care what your hair color is or what you identify as. You come in this door. No one's going to greet you by your pronoun, okay? Except if you're sir or ma'am, you might not like that, but this is a church. My Bible, the only place where they and them are referenced are for the demons. Come in here and sit down. You give me 4 weeks, 4 Sundays to tell me if anybody has said a word to you about your appearance or about your special sinful condition, which, by the way, we all suffer from in some degree or another. I'm tired of people not actually reading the Bible, but calling themselves a church to stand and make a mockery, and it is a mockery. When he says here very plainly, there is no difference between Jew and Greek. Why was he saying that? Because if you remember in one place, he says the Jews seek a sign, Greeks seek after wisdom. Elsewhere, the commentary that Paul uses for the diverse people knows no limits here. But at the end of the day, is it not called the Church of Jesus Christ, who said, whoever you are? So this is important. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. And how then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed, and how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard, and how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach except they be sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of them that preach the gospel of peace, that bring glad tidings of good things. But they have not all obeyed the gospel. So let me stop right there, because I really do like the definition that was given here some 25 years ago on the word obey and obedience. And the best way to describe it is not the way somebody would say you must comply, but rather for God's purpose it is running to the voice of the one who said it. The sayer is God. When God speaks, we ought to be going in his direction, not going the other way. So, when it says they have not all obeyed the gospel, they have not all obeyed the good news, they have not all obeyed the glad tidings. He says, for Isaiah saith, Lord, who hath believed our report? I don't want to touch this right now because I want to save this to dedicate a complete message to this subject of Isaiah. But he says, so then faith, again, you're going to see italics added by the translators, but faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the rhemas of God. So the question then is going to be answered in reverse. He says, but I say, have they not heard? Yes, verily, their sound went into all the earth, their words, their rhemas, unto the ends of the world. But I say, did not Israel know? First Moses saith, I will provoke you to jealousy by them that are no people, and by a foolish nation I will anger you. But Isaiah is very bold, and saith, I was found of them that sought me not, and was made manifest unto them that asked not after me. Speaking of the Gentiles. But to Israel he saith, all day long I have stretched forth my hands unto a disobedient and gainsaying people. So I want to go back and kind of look at everything that we've read through the 10th chapter before we move. There are some very important things that I want to say that maybe will fill in the blanks here. So on the subject of the law, I realized this last week after I spoke that based on some of the messages I see, some people are confused about the law. So let me address that. And the best way for me to address it is like this. And God help me if people don't know their country's history, you might really be up a creek somewhere with no paddle. All right, I want you to go back in time to just a little bit before George Washington, and America is not America, but America's on the verge of being England, right? Does everybody know that, hopefully? Good. All right. Now, when this massive, we'll call it a revolution, happened in this country, and now we basically are freed of the English. Remember, they came, they imposed their laws. Now, our laws are very much actually from their laws. I could trace our Constitution and our Bill of Rights and go all the way back in history and show how we actually got it from them and they stole it from somebody else and so on and so forth. But that's not my point. My point is that when the English had to go back to their country, there had to be new laws imposed in this land. So when we talk about the old law that was enforced during the reign or the almost reign of the English redcoats here, right? That law would be pushed aside, and a new law, which becomes the Constitution and later the Bill of Rights, that becomes the law of the land. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that it's going to stay that way, but it should be. Now, with that being said, just because the English left, it didn't mean that America was a lawless country, right? There was a new law that was put in place. And this is what we're dealing with when we talk about, for example, and it's very beneficial. If you go back and you read Romans 7, where Paul describes, almost in terms of a marriage, if the husband dies, the wife is free to marry another. And he's talking about essentially the covenants that the covenant, the first covenant, was ratified by the coming of Christ, and he fulfilled all of that. And if you're still not sure, come with me to Matthew 5. Actually, it probably begins in 6, but I think the brain is trying real hard to keep up with the energy of the room. That was sarcasm at its finest hour. Some of you are like, that's okay. I see the tonsils. All right, so to give you an idea, in Matthew 5, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, not one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. So you have that statement right there, and on the heels of it, I've explained this before, when he says, except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you shall in no case enter the kingdom of heaven. Again, box checking. This is what this is referring to. But then he goes on to, this is what we're talking about when we talk about raising the bar. He says, you've heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not kill, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment, and whosoever shall say to his brother, Raka, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. So he's taking the thou shall not kill and actually raising the bar by saying you don't even have to take it to that level. If you just hate your brother without a cause. And he says that you're in the same camp as someone who kills. And then he goes on to say again, you've heard that it was said by them of old time, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. So there's a lot of these. It has been said, you've heard it said. That's not Jesus saying, and the Ten Commandments says, or look at Exodus 20-something, right? No, he's saying it's been said of old, but behold, I say unto you. All the things that you might have fixated on that you thought were the biggest, now I'm going to make them a little bit bigger. It's one thing to say, oh, I've never killed a man before. If you drive in LA, you have, trust me. You have. You've slaughtered a couple of people, just trust me. So the point here is this, to be clear about Christ fulfilling the law. We have it in another place in the book of Galatians. It says the curse of the law fell on Christ that we may pass out from underneath it. It all fell on him. So he fulfilled. You can use whatever verbiage you want. But to the person who thinks that the law was abolished, that is an error. So there are subtleties here. We are not, I tried to explain this last week, we are not lawless people, although our state may look like it. We are not, as Christians, lawless people. So it's important to understand that the laws of God, we can look at them and we can say they are giving us a template for the man-God relationship and the man-man relationship. But it's a template. It's you look at it and you understand what could ever be wrong about telling somebody that they shouldn't kill. Can you answer that question? No. Okay. Glad there wasn't anybody that went, all right. So that's my point. The point is we have to be clear about what he is saying. Or I quoted this last week. The law was a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. So this, with the same intent that people would have parsed and studied and picked apart and scrutinized the law, we are simply to look at the author and finisher of faith and follow him, like the disciples did. Follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. We're supposed to follow just like that. There are a couple of other things I want to point out in this text which I think are noteworthy before we move on. And one of them is when he talks about how shall they preach except they be sent. And that I'd like to camp out for just a few seconds and talk about, because I don't spend a lot of time talking about this, but it is noteworthy. Not every person that's called into the ministry is given the same gift. This is the problem when you see people who try to emulate other people's ministry or work. I could say as a young minister, when I was starting out, I didn't really have a pattern for things. So the only pattern I knew was the late Dr. Scott. And eventually, not that I wanted to be like him, not that that's a bad or a good thing, but I wanted to be me before you with God. That was important to me, to be authentically me. Whether you like me or you don't like me, I'm going to be me. That means things can come out of my mouth that I didn't plan. I can say things, I'm not trying to be funny, but it just happens, and it happens that way. But probably the biggest thing that I want to point out to you is there is one small word in here. How shall they preach except they be sent? That is the word we get our English word for apostle from. It is God's call on a life that doesn't require that you grew up as a preacher's kid or that you went to seminary. That doesn't work like that. Trust me, now, after years of standing on this side of the pulpit, I understand things that previously didn't make sense to me. God does use certain things, and Paul wrote about this. He uses simple things to confound the wise, all right? His ways are not our ways, so plenty of times, if you look at the people that he chose, and I've cataloged many of them, you'd say, well, if it was a modern church, they wouldn't even make it onto the deacon board. But that's God's choosing, and when God calls somebody, here's the big work up to this. When God calls somebody and he sends them, the important thing to understand is I don't need to come here and tell you that my name is Apostle so-and-so. I see a lot of people do this. I'm Apostle so-and-so. I'm not making fun. I'm simply telling you, don't need to do that. Because God didn't give me the message of science. Trust the science. He didn't give me that message. God didn't give me the message of your best life yet. But God did give me a hunger for the Word of God, and he did give me the purpose for preaching the Word of God because I know its transformative power, and I've seen lives in my 18, 19 years of ministry. I've seen lives changed by God's Word. I've seen people who were absolute rejectors, and I don't want to know about anything, suddenly their nose is right there in the crack of the book, right? You see things that you can't unsee. But the biggest thing is to know that somebody has a calling and that they've been sent by God, and that is a really difficult, I'm just telling you, it's a difficult thing for people to use discernment. And let me give you some examples. I've hit hard on the Catholics. I've hit hard on the Jews. I've hit on everybody, so I might as well go for the Protestants. Think of what comes to your mind, 3 or 4 of the most popular evangelists that you can see on TV. And I'm going to ask you the question, which people will hate me for this. Why do people turn out in droves? Why do people, I can't wait to get there. It's like, the pandemonium of sitting in one of those services. And if you ask, we've heard firsthand, it makes you feel good, you feel great, whatever you're feeling. But that is not preaching the word of faith. That is just good feels in the moment. And those good feels in the moment are going to turn into probably dumpster feels in about 2 hours, because you didn't get the word of Christ even once. And don't count hallelujahs, amens, and praise Jesus. Those do not count. Those are what I call crack filler, okay? So what should a person, and there's plenty of people listening to me that go to other churches, what should you look for? You're wanting to follow this now. Now I've jumped from Paul's argument to his brethren to a generalization. So forgive me, because I am going to do it. What should you look for? You look for somebody. There is nobody perfect except for Jesus Christ. Don't look for perfection. Look for somebody that is opening up God's Word. Don't look at me personally and try to parse whether or not I'm left dominant or right dominant, or The stupid things that people get hung up on. Oh, he smokes a cigar, I can't listen, that's disgusting. Really? You have a problem then. And isn't it rich that today, God forbid you should look at somebody and judge them, but we still come under judgment in the ministry. Do you see the hypocrisy? Now, I tell you, I'm the first person I can spot a $3 bill when I got the TV on and you're watching whatever it is, it's the religious ghetto channels. You can spot the $3 bills all day long. They're throwing wheelchairs at people. Hey, somebody got healed and somebody just got their neck broken too, and they're going to need healing. But what did the people walk away with? And see, here's the thing. Most of these ministries, it's the deification of the minister. Oh, so-and-so healed people, and they did this. Not the Spirit of God reached down and healed that person, where there's no talk of any human being that was involved. You don't have the right to claim that. As a minister, you don't have the right to claim. I don't care if Oral Roberts, Billy Graham, and pick another one, if they all resurrected from the dead and said, "Do you know how many people we healed?" I'd say, go back to hell. You didn't heal anybody. God heals people. People don't heal people. God heals people. You may be the vessel. You may be the conduit. The minute you say, "I did this thing," run, Forrest, run. It is all within here. Paul is looking to make sure that people's focus is right, that when they open their mouth, it's something flowing from within. This is why when Christ said to Nicodemus, "You must be born again from above," these are theological pinnacles which you must take hold of this and understand. You don't need to understand the method or the means that God accomplishes being born from above. But just knowing that a man or a woman on their own cannot save themselves, that just sitting in a church, and listen to the difference between hearing faith, hearing words, and hearing faith, which becomes saving faith, versus hearing good, positive things, which may be good and edifying, but they are not salvific in their nature. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yes, ma'am. Now, if you're asking me as a Christian, I want to know everything that I can about salvation. I don't need to understand the how. I need to understand that I was drowning, flailing, about to go under, and God reached down, plucked me out of my drowning, whatever I was drowning in, set me on dry ground, didn't even turn around to say, "Are you okay?" I could only see, and I'm now obviously making this up to give you a ludicrous example, God walking away and me thinking, wow, this is amazing. God just reached down in the middle of nowhere, just where I was, took me where I was, brought me, saved me, I'm here. Now, do I have to convince myself that that was God? Do I have to convince myself that I need to like or love God? Because I recognize that my reality is not a delusion. That's the problem with a lot of what goes on out there and a lot of what goes on in churches. A delusion of either presenting special sinners or a special way of salvation, and neither one of those is biblical. And Paul is saying, I don't care if you are a practicing Jew, your legalism, your checkbox, I did this, I did that, will not get you in just as much as somebody that says, well, I did good works, I went to feed the homeless, I went to wash that old lady's car, I carried somebody's groceries. That's all great. Be a good, decent person. But that's not going to do anything for your salvation. All that's going to be is somebody will remember that you did, maybe. Hey, maybe we'll remember you did an act of kindness. By the way, apply this in your life. You could spend 50 years doing acts of kindness, and you do one big mess up, and the world will only be interested in your one big mess up, not the 50 acts or the 50 years of kindness that came before. So to me, do whatever you're going to do and do it quickly, but don't think that that's going to take you into heaven, because it's not, and we know that. Last but not least, as I bring this to a close, there is a very good warning for us. So how do people listen? How does listening happen? My guess is if I sat a couple of people down and queried them after the message, some may have heard different things than others, because we listen differently. We all listen differently. Some of us are You've heard this before, overstimulated listeners. So I say, the sheep are grazing, and all of a sudden, the cloud bubble comes up, and the sheep are over here. They're going over the fence, and then that goes to, gosh, I wonder what I'm going to have for lunch. Gee, did I turn the stove off? Do you think I should have let the dog out before? Oh, okay, now we're back in church. Okay, put my hat back on. You just missed everything I said, by the way. There are people like that listen like that. Don't raise your hand. Do you know them? Don't raise your hand. There are other people who do what I call they have the Rain Man syndrome listening technique. So if I said, the law worketh wrath, that's all the rest of the sermon. The law worketh wrath, the law worketh wrath, blah, 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 blah. And then they leave here, and that's all they got out of it, that one sentence or whatever it is. And then there's other people. They'll sit, they listen, they didn't retain anything. Does anybody have a problem retaining when they listen? It's okay if you raise your hand. Okay? That's because it requires effort. People think, I got ears. They're there, right? It requires effort. I once taught a message on this out of the work of the late Ralph Nichols out of the University of Minnesota, his little book called Are You Listening? If you didn't listen to that message, you need to find it and listen to it. Really listen. Really listen. Because I have noticed something. You ever notice the difference between you turned on the news and you listened to the news? You may retain or you may not retain. You may actually subconsciously say, I don't want to remember, right? Versus, I'm reading my Bible and I can't remember anything. I can't retain anything. There's actually a bigger problem. Don't compare the two and say they're the same, because the one that says I cannot retain requires a little bit more. It's actually work for the person who may have that slower learning and listening problem. But the big thing that he's saying here is to be receiving with what? Faith. Anything else short of that is going to result in a broken telephone. Your understanding of everything that he said here must be taken by faith. So when he says here over and over and over again, all of these concepts, whosoever shall call on the name of the Lord shall be saved. When he says again, for example, the many different places, Christ is the end of the law. All of these have to be received with faith and by faith to say, this is God's word, coming, by the way, out of the mouth of one who, having been steeped in Judaism, exposed to the living Christ, suddenly makes an about-face and says, this is the way. I'm going to take Paul's words of this is the way, and I'm going to walk in them because I have the clarity receiving this word or the words of faith that he's preaching, that we are receiving, that I keep perpetuating, should bring about something to say just in the simplest way. And he says it in several different places. The just shall live by faith. It is what tilted the Protestant movement, if you will, that one verse of Scripture. Martin Luther plugging along in his life under the canopy of the Catholic Church, an Augustinian monk, frustrated, feeling like there's just something not right, and somebody tells him, this, Martin, go read this verse. What does it mean to you? The just shall live by faith, which completely revolutionized the way he understood the Bible, the way he understood God, the way he lived his life. No longer checking the boxes, and I must do, and I must genuflex, and I must make sure I've done all of these different things, and the mea culpas, and the maxima mea culpas. No, I just have to trust Christ. So both to the people that Paul is talking to, his brethren, and to the general public that is in the sound of my voice, figure out that what we're dealing with is not only a big subject that culminates, as I've said many times now, in a future time. And I repeated this heavily in the early messages. The two sticks being put together in one hand represent a day in the future when people will stream into that small little swath of land to worship God. And I know it's far-fetched. We live in America. Why would people go there? Because God said that's the place. That is the place where war will take place. That is the final chapter of earth as we know it takes place visually right there. And on that same subject, the people who rejected, and I will say this again, not all, but those that rejected, that will have the capacity for God to open the eyes and the ears, will in that day see Christ, recognize their error. And when we talk about Christ as the door, don't make the mistake that many people have made for decades in saying, Christ is the door, but. What about these people? But. What about those people? But. Is Christ not called King of Kings and Lord of Lords? The last king on earth will be Jesus Christ. There is no, give me another door. You don't want that door? Christ even says it in, I believe, John 10. He says, I am the door, I am the way. You want to make it in, but you don't want to come through the door. That makes you a thief and a robber. Not my words, his. So to those who are still hard of heart, obstinate, who believe they're on the right track, their worship practices, I'm not the person standing here saying, hey, I'm right and you're all wrong. I'm the person standing here saying, take a look at the good news. Take a look at the evidence. And take a look at what's going to happen in the future. For some, the future's incredibly bright. And for others, maybe not so much. But that is, but the just shall live by faith. The point, I think I've just made it succinctly. This is why Paul, in the 11th chapter, will come back to make an argument that he actually twists back on us, cautioning us. And we'll, hopefully, Lord willing, we'll get there next week, but cautioning us, we ought to be careful to not become complacent, to not become obstinate, to not become disobedient, because that is the disease, by the way, of people that get comfortable. And unfortunately, I hate to go there, but just take a look around you. If you believe it or not, I happen to see that there are dynamics at work in our land. There are two groups of people. The people who think, I will close my eyes and the problems will go away. When I open my eyes, they'll be all gone. And they're not. Versus the people that say, I can do all things through Christ that strengtheneth me. God is in control. He's the same God yesterday, today, tomorrow, forever. That all things that God has ordered me or you to walk in, I shall walk in them, because why? He's prepared all good things for me and for you. Now, God is not going to turn around and say to you, you might have bet on the wrong horse, so I'm going to give you another door. The door has been open. The time for people to walk through the door is now. Not next year, not 5 years from now, now. And back to my challenge to those people who say, well, I couldn't come in the church, and fill in the blanks. I challenge you, make a reservation, come and sit in the church for 4 weeks, just 4 weeks. What's 4 weeks? 4 weeks is enough time for you to figure out that no one is going to judge you, criticize you, look at you. No one cares. You know why? Because people who actually have been taught by someone who's sent have an understanding of something. I'm in no position to judge you, your past or your present or your future. I'm in no position. Why? Because I am just like you. That expression, we're all in it together, really does apply. We're all sinners being saved by grace. So unless you have still the mindset that your sin is just so special and you need a special section just for you, but if you understand what I'm saying, we are all sinners. You see, just try me out here. This is a no judgment zone. If I see anybody judging or looking sideways, trust me, I know how to throw people out quicker than you can say your name. That's not what's on the table, though. What's on the table is I'm tired of people making excuses under the guise I'm not represented, under the guise no one understands me, under the guise that I have special issues. No, you don't. Your issues are exactly the same as mine and everybody else in the sound of my voice. You are messed up. You are in need of hope. You are in need of help. You are in need of healing, body, mind, soul, period. Quit qualifying what your issues are and get your butt into the church and start listening to someone who actually cares about the salvation of your soul instead of your hair color. Wait. I'm just like you. You have no idea of how hard that was to stop something. Right? I am who I am, and I can't be otherwise. I'm not a hypocrite. What I can tell you, don't be duped. Do not be duped by the things you think you're seeing. It's an attempt to weaken Christianity. It's an attempt to get ministers and pastors and deacon boards and anybody else who will listen to buckle and give way. This pastor is not giving way. You want to come in? Sinners are welcome. You want to come in? Sit down. Be respectful to other people. We are a live service. You want to come in here and learn? Learn. But don't come in here and make it that you have some specialty item that none of us, the rest of us, don't have. Listen, you may have issues, and that's your problem. But we all have issues. So what I'd like to leave you with is exactly what Paul was trying to nail down here. Don't think because you grew up in a Christian home that makes you special, just as much as somebody saying, well, you don't know my circumstances. No, I don't. And you don't know mine. So my advice to you is, if you really want to know who Christ is, if you really want to learn about Christianity, start with, I need to develop a relationship with Him. And that relationship begins when I get out of myself, when I stop making me the center of everything and I start looking at Him. He must increase and I must decrease. I start looking at Him as the way, the truth, the life, the bread of life. Taste and see that the Lord is good. And when I have and when you have, there won't be any talk about how I'm not counted in the equation, how I'm some lesser person in society. You make that. You victimize yourself. Quit being a victim and start being a victor for Jesus Christ's sake. That is my message, friends. I'm Pastor Melissa Scott, pastor of Faith Center, Glendale, California. I teach every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. If you'd like to attend services with us, simply call the 800 number, that is 800-338-3030, to join us. If you'd like to watch, listen, and learn 24 hours a day, simply log on to our website at www.pastormelissascott.com.